The rodeo grounds in Dry Creek were alive with the restless energy of a Friday night crowd. Lantern light glowed against the dust rising from the packed earth, and the smell of hay, leather, and fried food drifted from the concession stands. Every seat in the grandstands was filled. Weathered cowboys in worn boots, ranch wives in faded denim skirts, and children craning their necks to see over the rail. In the center chute, the most feared bull in 3 states waited. His name, whispered like a curse, Shadowrend. No rider had lasted the full 8 seconds, and more than one had left the arena carried on a stretcher. His thick, dark coat glistened under the lights, and his horns curved forward like blades waiting to strike. Shadowrend pawed the dirt inside the chute, each stomp sending tremors through the steel rails. The flank strap tightened, and the beast lunged forward, slamming his head into the gate with a sharp, metallic crack. The crowd erupted in anticipation, some shouting encouragement for the rider yet to mount, others murmuring bets on whether Shadowrend would send another man to the infirmary. Tonight felt different, though charged with something that didn't quite fit the usual rhythm of danger and spectacle. The far gate opened, and a figure stepped into the arena. He wasn't dressed like a rider, nor like one of the rodeo clowns. His denim shirt was sun-bleached and torn at the cuffs, and a battered hat shadowed his eyes. Dust clung to his boots, and the slow, deliberate way he walked made the crowd quiet. Without knowing why, even the announcer fell silent. This was Orson "Crowkiller" Vale, a man whose name carried stories the younger crowd had only heard in whispers, a name that had once dominated the rodeo before vanishing without a trace. Shadowrend froze. One massive hoof hovered above the dirt before settling slowly. His head lowered slightly, eyes fixed on Orson. The noise of the crowd thinned into a tense hush. Bulls didn't stop for anyone, especially not Shadowrend. And yet, the air between man and beast thickened, as if they recognized one another. An old rancher leaning on the rail muttered to himself, "Ain't never seen the devil pause. Not for no man." Down in the dirt, Orson stopped a few steps away from the bull. His lips moved with words only Shadowrend seemed to hear. The bull's breathing slowed, his massive chest rising and falling in rhythm with the man's. Finally, Orson spoke just loud enough for the first rows to hear. His voice was rough and steady. "You remember me, don't you?" Shadowrend's ears twitched, and he took a single step forward. The gate behind them groaned open. A shout went up from somewhere in the crowd. And in that instant, the story that would shake Dry Creek began to take shape. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or hold their breath. Shadowrend stood unnervingly still, his flanks heaving with slow, deliberate breaths. Orson, Crowkiller. Vale kept his eyes locked on the bull, every muscle in his body taut but unmoving. The gate behind them was still open, the rodeo hands frozen, unsure whether to drive the bull forward or clear the ring. From somewhere in the stands, a woman's voice cut through the murmur. "Orson?" It was soft, almost disbelieving, but in the heavy quiet of the arena, it carried. Orson's jaw tightened. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Maribel Dustveil had come back. Maribel was a sight against the pale glow of the arena lights. Her black hair was pinned up beneath a felt hat, and her long, dust-colored coat hung like a shadow around her frame. Years had changed her, sharpening her features and hardening her eyes. But the moment Orson heard her voice, something inside him twisted. She had been there the last time he rode, the night everything fell apart. She had seen the wreck, the goring, and the way Shadowrend had walked away from him without a backward glance. She had also been the one who vanished before Orson woke in the hospital. From the opposite side of the arena, another figure leaned on the rail, his presence like a splinter in Orson's peripheral vision. Silas Spur O'Bannon, the man whose name was whispered in the back corners of saloons when talk turned to broken riders and broken deals. His face was all angles and shadows, the brim of his hat casting his eyes into darkness. Silas didn't cheer, didn't call out. He simply watched, as if measuring the distance between the man and the beast, calculating something only he understood. Shadowrend shifted his weight, breaking the stillness with a heavy stomp. Dust curled into the air, catching in the arena. Lights like drifting smoke. Orson finally took a step back, not in retreat, but in slow, deliberate control. He knew the bull's eyes were still on him. He could feel them, heavy as a hand on his chest. The gate hands hesitated again, looking to the announcer for a cue, but the announcer was watching Maribel. Everyone seemed to know this was no ordinary. Standoff Maribel moved down from the stands, her boots finding the steps with quiet certainty. She came to rest against the arena rail, eyes never leading Orson. "You shouldn't be here," she said, the words carrying a weight only the two of them understood. The corners of Silas's mouth twitched, as though he'd been waiting for her to say it. Orson finally broke eye contact with Shadowrend, turning his head just enough to meet Maribel's gaze. "Neither should you," he said, his voice low, but edged. The bull snorted once, a deep rumbling sound that rolled across the arena floor. And in that moment, everyone knew, whatever history lay between man, woman, and beast, it was far from finished. The arena had emptied slowly after the incident, but the tension hung in the air long after the dust settled. Orson, Crowkiller. Vale stood near the corral fence, leaning against the rough wood, his hat tipped low to hide his expression. Shadowrend had been led back to his pen without a fight, something no one could remember seeing before. Rodeo hands whispered in small knots, glancing over their shoulders at Orson like he carried some curse that might spill over if they got too close. From the main gate, Temperance Vexley approached with the careful poise of someone who knew how to walk into danger without making it look like fear. Tall, with a coat the color of storm clouds and hair pinned in a tidy twist, she carried herself like a woman used to being obeyed. Temperance wasn't a rider or a rancher. She owned half the rodeo stock in Dry Creek, and her reputation was as sharp as barbed wire. She stopped a few feet from Orson, her eyes flicking toward the pen where Shadowrend paced slowly. "That bull never stood still for any man," she said, her voice calm but cold. "Care to explain?" Orson didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the pen, following Shadowrend's movements with an intensity that made Temperance shift her weight. She narrowed her eyes. "People will talk," she continued. "They'll say you broke him once. That you're the reason?" He's meaner now. Orson finally looked at her, and there was something in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, but the kind of pain that made a person dangerous. From the shadows near the tack room, Hollis Rawhide Creed stepped forward, his boots crunching in the gravel. Hollis was all grit and sunburn, his face carved by years under the open sky, and his voice carried the rasp of too many cigarettes. "Funny thing," he said, addressing Temperance, but keeping his eyes on Orson. "I was there the night he last rode. I saw the way Shadowrend looked at him then, same as tonight." Hollis crossed his arms. "And I saw who walked away from who." Temperance glanced between them, sensing a deeper story than either man wanted to tell. "If you two are hiding something, it's going to come out. This town eats secrets alive." She turned on her heel, the gravel crunching under her boots. As she left toward the stock pens, Orson remained still, his hands resting on the top rail. Hollis lingered beside him for a moment, his tone quieter now. "You know, Crowkiller, bulls don't remember faces, unless you give them a reason to." The words settled heavy in the cooling night air. Orson didn't reply. He just kept watching Shadowrend, as if the answers he needed were locked somewhere behind those dark, unblinking eyes. The next morning, the rodeo grounds were quiet. The usual clatter of early preparations muffled under a low blanket of fog. Orson Crowkiller Vale walked the perimeter alone, boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The air was sharp with the smell of wet earth and manure, but it carried another scent too, memory. He could almost hear the echoes of last night's crowd, the moment Shadowrend had stopped dead in his tracks. That silence had followed Orson into his dreams, bringing with it faces he hadn't seen in years. Near the far fence, a woman in a scarlet scarf leaned casually against a post, her silhouette framed by the haze. Zorabelle Ashthorne was trouble, wrapped in elegance, known for her poker skills and her knack for knowing things she shouldn't. She tilted her head as Orson approached, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Dry Creek hasn't seen you in a decade, Crowkiller," she said, her voice smooth but laced with something sharper. "Funny how the first night you're back, Shadowrend forgets what he's built his name on." Before Orson could answer, a deep, uneven voice broke through the fog. Quentin Bone Spur Draycott emerged from behind the loading ramp, his limp forcing him into a slow, deliberate stride. His broad shoulders and scarred hands told the story of a man who'd spent too many years in the ring. He stopped a few paces away, his eyes narrowing at Orson. "I was there back then," Quentin said, his tone heavy. "Saw the wreck. Saw you go down, and I saw Shadowrend's eyes after. You can tell yourself bulls don't remember, but I know better." Zora's gaze flicked between the two men, reading the unspoken weight in their words. "You all talk about that night like it's some ghost you can't put down," she said. "Maybe someone ought to just tell the truth." Orson met her eyes for the briefest moment, but it was Quentin who looked away first. Whatever that truth was, it had teeth. The sound of hooves against wood carried from the stock pens. Shadowrend was pacing again, his massive frame moving in tight, restless circles. Zora glanced toward the sound. "He knows you're here," she murmured, "and it's eating him alive." Quentin shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. Orson stepped closer to the fence, resting one hand on the damp rail. "It's not just him," he said quietly, almost to himself. The fog swallowed his words, leaving Zora and Quentin to wonder whether he'd meant the bull, the town, or the past that seemed to be closing in. Somewhere beyond the mist, Shadowrend stopped pacing, and for a moment, the world held its breath, dot by. The time the sun dipped low behind the hills, Dry Creek had the uneasy stillness of a town holding its breath. Orson Crowkiller Vale sat alone at the edge of the empty arena, the dirt beneath him still marked with the deep gouges of Shadowrend's hooves. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, even when the stands were empty. The silence wasn't peace, it was a warning. Footsteps crunched over gravel behind him, slow and deliberate. Winona Black Thistle appeared from the shadows, her dark braid hanging over one shoulder, her expression unreadable. She carried a worn leather satchel at her side and smelled faintly of sage and wood smoke. "You've stirred up something mean, Crowkiller," she said, her voice low, each word measured. "Shadowrend's been restless since last night. And the people, they've started remembering." Before Orson could answer, another figure emerged from the far end of the arena, tall, thin, and coiled with tension. Tobias Noosehand Cutter. His long coat shifted with the breeze, and the faint creak of rope could be heard with each step he took. A length of lasso hung loosely from his gloved hand, the end dragging in the dirt. "Vale," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Seems you've got the whole town whispering again. Must feel like old times." Winona didn't look at Tobias, but her voice hardened. Old times are exactly what's going to kill him if he's not careful. Orson rose to his feet, dusting his hands on his jeans. "You both want something," he said, "so spit it out." Tobias twirled the lasso in one hand, the rope hissing softly through the air. "I want to know what you're hiding about that bull," he said. "I've seen animals scared. I've seen them mean. But I've never seen one look at a man like Shadowrend looks at you. That ain't chance." Winona stepped closer to Orson, her eyes sharp as glass. And I want to know why the night you disappeared. 3 men ended up in the ground, and you walked away with nothing but a limp. The air between them grew heavy, the unspoken history pressing in. Somewhere beyond the pens, Shadowrend bellowed, a deep, guttural sound that rolled through the ground beneath their feet. Orson's gaze drifted toward the sound, then back to the 2 in front of him. "You want answers," he said quietly. "You'd better be ready for what comes with them." The last light of day slipped below the horizon, and in the gathering dark, Shadowrend roared again, louder this time. Like he knew the noose was tightening on more than just him. The rodeo grounds that night were lit in patches, lamps burning over the chutes and the pens, leaving long stretches of shadow where the dark seemed to breathe. Orson, Crowkiller. Vale stood near the main corral, watching Shadowrend pace. The bull's horns caught the light with each turn, his breath misting in the cool air. Orson knew the animal wasn't just restless. He was waiting. From the far side, Maribel Dustveil approached, her long coat brushing the dirt. "You should leave," she said without preamble, "before this town remembers everything." Orson didn't turn to look at her. "They already have," he replied. "They're just waiting for someone to say it out loud." A shadow broke from the darkness near the tack shed. Silas Spur O'Bannon stepped into the light, his boots heavy against the packed dirt. "Then maybe it's time," he said. Behind him, Temperance Vexley emerged, her eyes fixed on Orson with the same cold focus she used when buying stock. "If you think you can keep this between you and that bull," she said, "you're wrong. The rest of us have skin in this." "Gang." Footsteps sounded on the wooden platform above the pens. Hollis rawhide. Creed leaned on the railing, spitting into the dirt before speaking. "I was there the night it went bad, and I remember exactly who turned their back on who." His words hung in the air like the slow draw of a pistol. Zora Bell Ashthorne stood beside him, her scarlet scarf flicking in the breeze. "Careful, Hollis," she said softly. "The truth cuts deeper than any horn." From the shadows near the gate, Quentin Bonespur Draycott appeared, his limp more pronounced in the lamplight. Behind him, Winona Blackthistle slipped silently into view, her presence like the tightening of a knot. And last of all came Tobias Noosehand Cutter, his rope swinging loosely at his side. One by one, they formed a half-circle around Orson and the corral. It wasn't a gathering. It was a reckoning. Shadowrend stopped pacing. The great bull turned, facing the group, his eyes settling on Orson. The air between them was thick with something the others could feel but not name. Orson stepped forward until the rail pressed against his legs. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the stillness. "You want to know the truth," he said, looking not at them, but at Shadowrend. "It starts with the night none of us walked away clean." The bull's breath steamed in the lamplight, and for a moment, it almost looked like he nodded. Somewhere beyond the grounds, a coyote howled, and the circle around Orson tightened. The lamp nearest the corral flickered, casting shifting light across the dirt. Orson Crowkiller Vale stood with the half-circle of faces around him, each one etched with suspicion, resentment, or fear. Shadowrend's steady breathing was the only sound, heavy and rhythmic, like a drum keeping time for a story no one wanted to hear. Orson let the silence stretch until it pulled at their nerves. "It was the Dry Creek Finals," he began, his voice low. 10 years ago, the last time I rode." Maribel Dustveil crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "We know that much," she said. "What we don't know is why 3 men ended up dead before sunrise." Orson didn't flinch. "Because it wasn't an accident," he replied. "And because Shadowrend wasn't the only dangerous thing in that arena." Silas Spur O'Bannon shifted his weight, his boots grinding into the dirt. "You're saying someone set it up?" Orson met his gaze. "I'm saying more than one person in this circle has blood on their hands. The murmur that followed was sharp and uneven. Temperance Vexley's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Hollis Rawhide Creed leaned forward on the rail above. "I saw you hit the dirt that night, Crowkiller. Saw the horn take you. And I saw you get up again when everyone thought you were done. You walked right past me, past everyone, and straight to the back pens. What were you looking for?" Orson's eyes flicked toward Shadowrend. "I was looking for him," he said simply, "because I knew he'd seen it." Zora Belle Ashthorne tilted her head, her scarlet scarf catching the lamplight. "Bulls don't tell stories," she said. Orson's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "They do if you know how to listen." "Quentin, Bone." Spur, Dracot's voice cut in, rough and deliberate. "You're telling me that Animal remembers who killed those men?" Orson's gaze stayed fixed on Shadowrend. "I'm telling you he remembers everything. And he's been waiting for this night as long as I have." Winona Black Thistle's voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension. "So if we believe you, what happens next?" Orson stepped closer to the rail. The bull's dark eyes locked on him like a mirror. "Next," he said, "we stop pretending none of us were part of it." Shadowrend snorted, a deep, rumbling sound that made every head turn. Tobias Noosehand Cutter's rope twitched in his hand. The flickering lamp gave one last sputter before dying, plunging the corral into shadow, and in the dark, something heavy moved. The sudden blackout turned the rodeo grounds into a void. For a moment, no one moved, their breathing the only sign of life. Then came the sharp scrape of hooves against wood. Shadowrend was moving, his bulk shifting somewhere within the blackness. Orson Crowkiller Vale didn't flinch. He knew the bull's rhythm, each pause and stomp like a heartbeat he could follow even without sight. A hiss of rope cut through the dark. Tobias Noosehand Cutter's voice was low but steady. "I've got him," he said. "Dog." The sound broke off with a grunt, followed by the unmistakable thud of something heavy hitting the dirt. Someone cursed, and the metallic rattle of a gate echoed through the air. The bull was no longer penned. Maribel Dustveil's voice came next, tight with panic. "Orson, where is he?" Orson moved toward the sound of Shadowrend's breathing, his boots finding the familiar grooves in the arena floor. "He's not after me," Orson said. "Not yet." The tension in his voice was enough to make even Silas Grim Spur O'Bannon keep still. Then came the low, guttural bellow. Not the challenge of a bull in the ring, but the warning of something cornered and angry. A shadow shifted past Orson, fast enough to brush his arm, and he caught the faint smell of blood. "Someone's hurt," Winona Black Thistle called from the edge of the dark, "and it's fresh." A flare of light cracked the blackness. Zora Belle Ashthorne had struck a match, her scarlet scarf barely visible in the flicker. The glow fell across the dirt, revealing Quentin Bone Spur Dracot on one knee, clutching his side. His hand was slick and red. "It wasn't the bull," he gasped. It was the same as that night." His eyes locked on Orson, the words shaking with pain. "We were never supposed to walk away." Temperance Vexley's voice was sharp from somewhere beyond the light. "Who else was there, Quentin?" His breath caught, and his answer came in a ragged whisper. "3 of us. And one of them's here right now." The match burned down to Zora's fingers, forcing her to drop it into the dirt. Darkness swallowed them again, but the silence that followed was no longer just tense. It was dangerous. Somewhere in that black, the truth had finally begun to surface, and it was only a matter of time before it came charging out like Shadowrend himself. The darkness broke with the crack of a lantern being lit. Its weak glow revealed dust hanging in the air like smoke. Orson Crowkiller Vale stood near the corral fence, the others spread out in wary half-circles. Shadowrend loomed just beyond the light's reach, his massive shape shifting, his eyes catching the faint orange glow. Like twin embers. Quentin Bone Spur Dracot was still on one knee, blood seeping through his shirt. Maribel Dustveil knelt beside him, pressing a hand to the wound. "Tell them," she urged, "before you can't." Quentin swallowed hard, his breath ragged. His gaze moved past Orson, past Shadowrend, to the figure standing furthest from the lantern. "Silas Grim Spur, it was you." The words hit like a thrown horseshoe. Silas didn't flinch. He took a slow step forward, his boots sinking slightly into the dirt. "Careful, Quentin," he said in that low, deliberate tone. "You're bleeding out, and your memory's always been selective." But Hollis Rawhide Creed leaned over the rail, spitting in the dirt. "I remember too. You were in the back pens that night, Silas. You walked out after the horn took Orson, before the men were found." Temperance Vexley's eyes narrowed, her arms crossed tight. "You set it up, didn't you? The wreck, the fight in the shadows, all of it. You wanted Orson gone, and you thought the bull would finish the job." Silas's mouth curved in something close to a smile, but his eyes were dead cold. "The bull was just a cleanup crew. But you, all of you were too stubborn to die." Zorabelle Ashthorne's voice was sharp as a spur. "And now you've got the bull loose again. What's the plan this time, Silas? Hope he finishes the work?" Silas's answer was cut short by the deep, rolling bellow of Shadowrend, louder than it had been all night. The bull stepped forward into the lantern's light, his head lowered, eyes fixed squarely on Silas. Orson moved to the rail, his hand gripping the wood. "He remembers," he said quietly. "And so do I." Tobias Noosehand Cutter's rope hissed through the air as he coiled it tight. "Then I guess this ends tonight," Tobias muttered. The lantern flame wavered in the wind, shadows leaping across the ground like restless spirits. Shadowrend stomped once, the dirt trembling underfoot. Silas's hand drifted toward the knife at his belt. The gate to the open arena stood wide, the path between man and beast clear. The lantern's light shook with the wind, casting jagged shadows across the arena. Silas Grimspur O'Bannon stood with one hand near his knife, the other curled into a fist. Shadowrend was still as stone, his massive frame coiled with the tension of a drawn bow. Orson Crowkiller Vale stepped between them, his boots sinking slightly into the dirt. "This ends now," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. Silas's grin was thin and bitter. "You really think you can stop me? You had your chance 10 years ago." He stepped sideways, trying to angle toward the open gate. Shadowrend's head followed his every move. Maribel Dustveil's voice rang out from behind the fence. "Don't turn your back on him, Silas. You of all people should know better." Orson's eyes didn't leave the bull. "That night wasn't an accident," he said loud enough for all to hear. "Silas used the chaos in the ring to settle his own debts. Those 3 men died because they caught him in the act. Hollis Rawhide." Creed's voice came low from the rail. "And you took the blame, Crowkiller." Orson nodded once. "I stayed quiet because I thought the bull would do what I couldn't, but Shadowrend chose to let me walk away." The air thickened as Silas shifted his stance, and Shadowrend stomped once, dirt flying. "You think this animal cares about your truth?" Silas spat. Orson took one slow step back, opening the space between himself and Silas. "He doesn't care about mine," Orson said, "but he remembers yours." The bull's breath came heavy, his muscles bunching beneath his dark hide. Tobias Noosehand Cutter's rope swung low, ready. Winona Black Thistle whispered something sharp and quick to Temperance Vexley, but no one took their eyes off the ring. Then, with no warning, Shadowrend lunged. The ground shook under his charge, the sound of his hooves like a drumbeat of judgment. Silas drew his knife, but the bull hit him square, the impact sending man and blade spinning into the dirt. The knife clattered uselessly away. When the dust settled, Silas lay groaning, his hand clutching his ribs. Shadowrend stood over him for a breath, then turned and walked back toward the corral on his own, his job done. Orson approached slowly, looking down at Silas. "The only reason you're breathing is because he let you," Orson said. "Remember that." Maribel's eyes met Orson's from across the arena, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The crowd, those who had dared to watch from the shadows, began to murmur, and as Shadowrend disappeared into the dark of the pen, Orson knew the past was finally buried, not by silence, but by truth.